And now we move on to our final session of the day, and that is leveraging your inclusive workplace and becoming an employer of choice. And with that, I welcome Michelle Branigan, CEO, Electricity Human Resources Canada, to lead this discussion. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Anthony. Great discussion so far. Really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As you mentioned, I'm with Electricity Human Resources Canada, and it was interesting listening to Bill's data on the gaps in the labor market and how many people are actually going to be required in construction. Very similar in the electricity sector. Our latest labor market data released just a few months ago showed that the workforce not only will need thousands and thousands of people, but that it really still lacks diversity across all underrepresented groups. So that's gender, Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, the LGBTQ community, and by a very wide margin. And in an industry where trades represent the biggest cohort in our workforce, only 6% of those working in the trades are women. Graham had iterated the business case, and that we know that the business case shows the benefit of diversity of thought, better financial results. What we're also seeing, of course, is the fact that employers are competing in an extremely tight labor market right across the country in every sector, and job seekers themselves are reporting that a diverse workforce is important for them when they actually evaluate job opportunities and offers. I speak to many students in post-secondary education looking to get into the trades, and I'm amazed at what they're looking at. They're looking at employers' annual reports, your senior leadership team, and if they don't see themselves represented there, that's going to make a difference to your ability to attract and retain. And really, organizations that can build a truly inclusive workplace are going to have the edge when it comes to both the recruitment and attention of that workforce, and really position themselves as employers of choice. So we're going to dive into that today. I am so excited to have three great panelists with us. Lindsay Janca is the Global Director of Public Relations at Hatch. Meg Mathis, RSC, is the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Modern Niagara. And Elaine Carelse is Senior Management, People and Culture at Orion Construction. So Elaine, Meg, Lindsay, really looking forward to continuing the conversation we started last week, and truly believe we're going to run out of time before we run out of conversation. Before we get into our main questions, I do want to start off with taking just a couple of minutes from each of you as to why this topic is close to your heart. Meg, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for having me here today, and thanks for the introduction, Michelle. This is really passionate to me, partially because I'm an openly transgender person. So I identify as a transgender woman, and I work in the skilled trades and construction environment. And I have an interesting story about how I got here. But without this work being in place to allow diverse individuals, like we just heard some folks say, be visible, be in that space. I'm proud to take some ownership of one person being transgender in that space, and what it might offer for others as well down the road. But that's why it's really deeply personal and meaningful to me.
Thanks, Meg. Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I work at Hatch, which hopefully many of you know is an engineering and project delivery company. So like many of the companies we heard from today, we still struggle with a lot of different types of diversity in the company, right? Engineering is still male dominated. I've had the privilege of spending my entire career here at Hatch so far, almost 17 years. And we spoke last week about, I'm passionate because I've seen the difference. I know that we heard from some of the previous panelists that we aren't moving quick enough, and I wouldn't disagree, but I have seen the steps that we've taken. I've felt it personally, and I'm enthusiastic about taking that further. And so that's really why I got involved in our D&I efforts here at Hatch.
Thanks, Lindsay. Elaine, over to you.
Hello. I was fortunate enough to grow up in South Africa during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, during the movement from apartheid into an all-inclusive democratic country, and diversity, equity, and inclusion in a affectionately named South Africa, the Rainbow Nation, has taught me everything I know about trying to understand everyone and where they come from and what drives them. So that is what really resonates with me. And at Orion, I was the only woman when I started, and now we make up 24% of the company.
Stick with you for a little bit, because I think that's a really good segue into what that journey looked like, from being the only woman there to 24%. That's such a big jump in a relatively short period of time. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looked like?
Yes, absolutely. Attracting women to a male-dominated industry requires an approach that addresses professional aspects, cultural aspects, as well as social aspects. And I thought to myself, what would appeal to women? So in my opinion, being respected, challenged, and excited to contribute your unique skill set and different perspectives. We promote a friendly, positive, all-inclusive work environment where leadership is promoted, not management. Because in my opinion, leaders build their teams up, managers are self-promoting. So for that reason, I was so happy when I started at Orion, because I just felt that leadership comes from the top down. So if the president of the company fosters that kind of environment, then everyone else in the company is going to follow. So I just felt so comfortable from the first day when I started there. We were sharing one big office. I was in an office with 5 guys. I learned everything I know about the construction industry because I came from a different industry. And I learned that everyone is there to lift each other up.
So one of the things that I wanted to dive into, thanks, Elaine, and I'm going to come back to a couple of things on that in a little bit, but as we go through the conversation, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about was intersectionality as well too, because I think it's very easy to label people and to put them in boxes and think that all women think this way or won't be interested in working in the trades because it's a dirty job or whatever it is, or all Indigenous people want to think this way and want to do that. And so we have to be very careful with that whole labeling piece and expecting that those underrepresented groups in our industry are homogenous. So that's something that's a real challenge and a real risk as well. Meg, you've actually done a lot of outreach for modern Niagara and for industry in general, and you've been very open, as you said, about your own experiences and your journey. Could you talk a little bit about that journey and some of the challenges that you've seen or experienced along the way, and how the environment that you're in now, like where you've ended up? What is the difference? What is the difference that is there that has made that such a place that you want to be and place that you want to work in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think intersectionality is so important, and it's something I'd encourage you to learn a little bit more about if you're on this journey of DEI. So, you know, yeah, we collect and organize things into boxes to make sense of them. That usually ends up leading to stereotyping, and having biases does not make us bad. It just means that we're human beings. We all have them, and we all use them. They're mental shortcuts to help us out. The unconscious mind can actually handle or takes in 11 million pieces of information per second, whereas the conscious brain can only handle 40. That's 40, not 40 million. So, you know, we use a lot of shortcuts. So looking at intersectionality, it's a great way to try and get to know more people and to do some of that outreach. And like many folks have said, there's no real silver bullet in DEI, but it's the small things, I believe, that you do that can really help lead forward into meaningful change. So, you know, when I introduce myself and I say, hi, I'm Meg Mathis, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an openly transgender person, that gives you the ability to address me by my pronouns, to understand who I am and understand where I'm coming from. If I say, yeah, me and my spouse, we're going camping this weekend, she has a nice spot that she's picked out for us. Again, through intersectionality and through communication, that lets you know that I have a spouse, I have a partner, and that she's a female as well, because I introduced her as she. So intersectionality, you get to learn a whole lot of different sides and parts about people. And I think it's important to note that there's some protected grounds. Some of the dimensions of our identity are protected grounds in Canada. And people still make mistakes in a lot of those areas as well, but we can do better. Part of my journey, so I've known that I was a transgender person since about the age of 5. I didn't really know what it was, and part of that, I ended up actually leaving home at age 14. Just didn't really agree with my parents and understanding, and I knew that there was something different about me. So my life took a very unique journey. I got into the skilled trades when I was 18. I didn't have the schooling I needed, so I had to do some upgrading to get into the skilled trades. But I made it nonetheless. I was always really handy with taking things apart and fixing things. But it wasn't until later on in my 40s, when I was actually working at Modern Niagara, that I felt that I had the courage and ability. You know, like Craig mentioned in the last session, you know, waiting for someone else to go first in the industry.
Yes.
That's something that I always was looking for and did not find. So I think it was fortunate that Modern Niagara had already started on their DEI journey, and just hearing some of the leadership, you know, the things that they were saying, and I could see that they were demonstrating it and putting it into action. So that meaningful action really helped open my eyes into the ability that I could potentially come out as a transgender person. So yeah, there's a little bit of a story on me and how I came to be in this space. Now I'm the senior manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I get to pour my heart and soul into my passion, which is supporting DEI in the construction industry in particular. And I live and reside in Alberta, which is well known for being redneck and conservative, but I'm happy to exist in this space, and there's a lot of good that can be done.
Thanks, Meg. I really appreciate your honesty on that. And I think, if anything, that just shows leaders and people on this call how impactful having a really truly inclusive environment can be to an individual. Because at the end of the day, we're all people, and we have to remember that, to go back to that humanity piece, right? And the difference in providing a safe environment, an inclusive environment where you feel that you can actually be yourself. That's really impactful, really powerful. Lindsay, I know you're a very big believer in being an ambassador for DEI and to translating into change that you can see and you can measure. Could you talk to us a little bit? I'm all about the practicality component, and maybe provide a few examples of where you have seen that change, or have been able to be involved with that change, or lead it, or Hatch's ambassadorship. I know some of the things that they've done there, whether that's on recruitment or retention.
Yeah. So there's a few different things that come to mind on how we've achieved this. first counter to a lot of people on the call actually is we didn't make DEI a certain person's job. At Hatch, which I know is a lot of people will put an executive or manager in place and go from there. We really believed in the organic kind of from the ground up approach to it. So we looked for allies and support throughout the business. And I think that we've had a lot of success building ambassadors that way. And when we first started our D&I efforts, we really focused on the why. And for us as an organization, we have a vision at Hatch about creating positive change in the world. And people really connect to that vision. I think it's a source of pride for a lot of our employees. And we were able to really directly connect the benefits of DE&I to that mission. Insofar as we're an engineering company and we're here trying to solve the world's biggest challenge, things like climate change. And you can't do that if you put a bunch of the same people around the table. We really, really, really believed solely in the idea of diversity of thought and how important that is to innovation. And so I think that on top of it being the right thing to do, which is what we also communicated, we really connected specifically at Hatch. This is why it's so important. And people really got that from the get-go. And so I think that we, from the start, had a real groundswell of support for DE&I. And so that has created ambassadors. Now we've done more practical things, right? In how we tell those stories, like training our staff on how to use social media effectively, giving them tools to be able to tell stories. And we always see that when our staff are, number one, compelled to talk about DE&I topics. I don't know why. Every time we do things around DE&I, we see them get a lot of engagement. Actually looked at our LinkedIn stats, and of the top 10 performing posts in the past year, 6 of them were DE&I related content. So it just seems to be something that our people and our audiences really connect with. And so, yeah, that ambassador training, getting out there and encouraging people to tell their stories, I think that's really helped to make us an employer of choice in these different communities, because it's not just Hatch patting ourselves on the back all the time and saying, oh, this is a great place to work. It's our employees going out and telling those stories. And so that's really the lens that we've tried to take for telling these stories. And then another point, sorry, I have a lot to say, but you talked as well about how we transition that ambassadorship into real impacts into the company, and how we recruit and retain more people. And I think those same ambassadors are the ones who have gone into the communities and become ambassadors in these communities. So, we partner, we've brought in the schools from which we directly recruit. We've gotten involved with different associations like Engineers or the National Society for Black Engineers. And our engineers feel really strongly about supporting those teams. So they themselves will go into the communities, offer their time, become coaches or whatnot for those associations. And we've seen a massive impact on the amount of self-identifying members of those communities applying for Hatch, for different positions at Hatch. I ran the numbers, and the numbers are very shocking. A huge improvement in the past 5 years or so. So we're seeing direct correlation between this ambassadorship and impact into the business.
Which is fantastic, because a lot of times we've seen over and over again that people aren't quite ready when they apply for jobs to self-identify and put themselves down as part of an equity seeking group. I know in our electricity sector, for example, people with disabilities, I think we were at 1 or 2% in our last iteration, and we know that is it was always low, but we know that that's not the correct number, and it's for that fear of putting that on, that you might not get the job that when you apply for it, if you actually say that I have an apparent or a non-apparent disability, right? So those are phenomenal results. Elaine, I want to come back over to you a little bit and talk about how does an employer actually plan and implement on their, and then check, because I think there's a process, right? So you start planning, what do we need to do? What does that look like? Then you implement it, you check and you act, and then, linking that into company objectives, making sure that things are sustainable, and then we'll talk a little bit, and I'd be interested in hearing from all of you on how we actually measure success. What does success actually look like? But Elaine, just going to start that over to you. How does an employer actually get started and go through the process?
At Orion Construction, we have leadership meetings where all the leaders sit down together once a quarter and decide on the plans, the big plans for the company for the coming quarter. And my position is where I am looking after the recruitment and focusing on promoting Orion as an inclusive construction company. So basically what we do is we create measurable metrics. We give each of our leaders a goal, and then at the end, at the next quarterly meeting, we discuss whether those goals have been met, and we have I have quarterly check-ins with all of the whole team, including the leadership. I get feedback from every team member. I then share, as an example, the marketing team. I would share the marketing team's feedback and suggestions with the director of marketing and sales. Then the director can take that information and make the changes that need to be made. And I share the whole company's feedback with the president. We make sure that we deal with any complaints, any suggestions that are actionable, and we have one-on-one discussions with anyone who has suggested something that we feel is maybe not actionable at this point, but in the future. And in that way, we make sure that everyone feels heard and they feel that their contribution is always taken into account. We collaborate on as much as we can, and we involve as many different departments within Orion in collaboration on everyday matters. So I feel like we really advocate for each other, and that's how we seem to find our success. Just pure communication.
Yeah, you can never over communicate. I always say that internally or externally. Lindsay and Meg, I'm going to come to both of you with that question as well, because I think it really gets into the nuts and bolts of what we actually do. And then as we move out of that question, I'm going to move forward into how we communicate those successes and how do we utilize those successes to build that next generation workforce. But I think there's two aspects to this here. We're talking about building an inclusive workplace and then communicating that externally from a recruitment perspective, but we also have to engage with those who are already working for us in the industry. So it's that retention piece. So what are some of the practical things that or actions that you've seen to be so successful within your organizations? Meg, I'll go to you first.
Sure. Yeah, a couple things that we have is a few affinity groups at work. So having ERGs, employee resource groups, or affinity groups in place to help support individuals is really important. Some of ours are in their early stages as well, so they're kind of getting their house in order before they broadly open it up to the whole organization. But it really shows some commitment and passion, and seeing those folks who have lived experience and you know they see a place where they can belong. It really resounds with them, because I feel that setting the table at the organization for equity deserving groups is a real important step early on in the process. Otherwise, people are going to be walking out the door just as quick as they come in.
Be careful of tokenism as well too, right? It's very easy we want to make sure that it's not, that people are not put in the position that they are the poster child for a certain group, and then feeling all that pressure. And I've always remembered about 10 years ago, there was a young female power line technician that we were working with, and and many people were working in her organization with, and putting her out there to talk about her experience and why she got into the industry. And she just wanted to go to work and do her job at the end of the day. And so over a period of a couple of years, she ended up leaving the sector altogether. She was just tired of being sort of the poster child for female PLTs at that time. So I think that's something that we've also got to be very careful about. Lindsay, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in there.
Yeah, well, on the topic of tokenism and kind of making sure they have the right people in the right jobs, I think one of the most successful strategies that we've taken at Hatch is to not set targets on people around hiring, particularly hiring women, because we knew that that was our biggest area for improvement. So the approach that we took rather was to look at interview slates. So we said, if you're hiring an experienced hire, you need to ensure that at least a third of your slate is women. So if you're going to interview 3 people, at least one of those people needs to be a woman. For student and new grad positions, we insisted that that be half, 50-50, because we always wanted to focus on hiring the right person. But if a diverse slate is not in front of you, there's no chance you're going to hire a diverse candidate.
Right.
So we also put checks and balances in place. So if you are going to hire a position and that slate has not been met, that gets escalated up to management. You have to justify why it is that you're choosing to hire someone and not meeting these slate requirements. And we've seen when we started implementing that slate, we saw a massive impact in the hiring. So it really did work, and people could get behind that instead of saying, again, we didn't want to put a target saying you need to hire 50% or whatever, because again, the people want to know, the people being hired into those positions want to know that they got there on merit and not because they were ticking a box, right? A few other things, though, just related, those interview slates and other metrics of diversity, because you were talking about communication. And so one of the things that we endeavored to do from the get-go was to be really transparent with our workforce about what our efforts look like. And we created an interactive diversity dashboard. It's actually built upon an example that we saw from Enbridge, who I know many of you will know. But we created it's a pretty simple Power BI dashboard, but it allows our employees to have visibility into a lot of our diversity metrics and to be able to filter down either by business unit or location, region, so they can see exactly what does that look like maybe within my office or within my region, within the group of the business that I work in. It includes things like gender diversity. It also includes interview slates. So you can hold to account to your management if you know, hey, look, I had a look and we have not met our interview slates on 80% of our interviews. And I see all these non-diverse candidates coming in the door. You can really hold them to task on that. So those are 2 really practical things that we've put in place, right? The visibility of this interactive dashboard and the interview slate approach to hiring.
That's fantastic, because I know when I've often gone out to talk to companies and I've asked them about their stats in their organization, and they may say, I'll just use gender as an easy one. They may say, oh yeah, well we've got 35 or 48% women working in the organization. I said, that's great. Where are they? Let's have a look. And they're all in customer service, or there's only 1 or 2%, or none on the board, or 1 at the executive leadership, and everybody else is further down, not in a decision-making role, not even in a managerial role. So you really have to understand. So I love that approach, that you can really dive in. And I think the transparency internally to your organization and your employees is wonderful, because again, if you come back around to our panel discussion, and what we're talking about today is also using the success and to bring new people in. And if your current employees are your biggest ambassadors, how much easier is it for you to be that employer of choice, right? They're effectively doing the work for you, which is wonderful. Right. Love to ask. I'm a big fan. It's great to say things that go right. And so I'll sort of go around the panel and see, okay, is there any one thing that you've seen the biggest impact come from, one initiative, Or the alternative is, you know, when have things gone wrong? Because I think there's a lot of times there's fear of failure when it comes to developing and implementing DEI policies and processes or trying something new. And I think we have to make sure that we're not afraid of that failure, that it doesn't stop us from progressing or moving ahead. So any thoughts on that, Elaine? I'm going to kick off with yourself.
Yes. I'm going to say that the way we started with small steps. So we decided to implement an annual cultural lunch last year. We have at least 17 different cultures at Orion. So our cultural lunch was fantastic. And this year it was even better than last year. And basically what we're trying to encourage is people should just have conversations with each other and learn from each other. And basically, I find that if we have an open door communication policy at the office, everyone feels heard. So I have regular employee surveys. We have our monthly team events where we include the field staff as well as our first aid team, as well as the office staff. And we just have opportunities, whether it's sporty events or whether it's just a meal at a restaurant or an event where we include the whole family, just to get to know everyone. And it's really, really worked well. Just having an opportunity for everyone to get to know each other.
Meg?
Something that we did that worked really, really well was last year we held a series of focus groups with equity-seeking groups. So we took the four main ones from the Government of Canada: Indigenous peoples, women, persons with disabilities, and visible minorities. And I held a series of 5 focus group sessions with them just to try and talk about what's important to them and what they would like to see change. It was pretty powerful. We actually came up with 15 SMART goals for the organization out of those sessions, and we're able to incorporate those into our business plan. So that's an example of things that work really well. I'd also like to speak to some things I hear in industry that don't work really well or that are big mistakes. And it's around having inauthentic action, you know, like becoming a member of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business just to win an award or to win a project. You know, there's nothing sustainable there for you, and your people and your clients see through it very quickly. So be very cautious around stuff like that.
Okay. Thanks, Meg. Lindsay?
Meg, that was a great point about, you know, inauthentic. I think about communications as well. I'm jotting things down as you were talking there. That's something we struggle with a little bit is we find employees want the company to be really quick to respond to social issues, whether it be Black Lives Matter or anything else, Pride, whatever. And sometimes that's not that easy to do. On a big, you know, Hatch is a big giant company. We're 10,000 people. We're all around the globe. And you all know online as well as anyone else that these issues are so nuanced. And so how you talk about them and how you do so in a way that honors all of the different lived experiences can be really, really tricky. So I'm just commenting on that we haven't figured that challenge out yet quite, but it's something that we're constantly thinking about and struggling with in communications. One thing that went well and one thing that hasn't gone so well, I'll comment on. First is one thing that's gone really well, and it's the right timing to talk about it, is we implemented a program here at Hatch called the Positive Change Awards. We believed a lot in recognition, recognizing those that are doing good things around DE&I. And so these awards, employees can nominate their colleagues. They honor those who are working towards building an inclusive workplace at Hatch, and we honor those people with a profile and whatnot. And it's actually closing today, the program, the nomination period, and we've had over 600 nominations So I'm absolutely thrilled about that. That means 600 of our employees felt compelled enough to take the time to put together a nomination to talk about their colleagues and the great things that they're doing around the business. And I just think that shows an engaged workforce that believes so much in this topic and the work that's being done around the business. So I'm absolutely thrilled about that. And then consequently, when we think about ambassadorship, one of the good outcomes of that, not only is that those people get recognition and the winners obviously know that they won, but we also make a point to provide nomination certificates to everyone that's been nominated, because I think there's a lot of engagement in knowing that someone took the time to nominate you. But it gives us content for our ambassadors to go and talk about. You know, each time we highlight one of the winners of those awards, all of their connections are congratulating them. And again, it's highlighting not only the individual and what they're doing, but that they serve in a company that has allowed them to bring these inclusive ideas to bear in the market. So I think that's really wonderful. It's been really, really successful. It's our 3rd year, and each year it just gets bigger and bigger. So I'm really pleased with that. One thing that didn't go so well, honestly, and this might be my personal opinion, but if I could go back, hindsight 2020, I think when we were first implementing our program and thinking about our actions, I think we should have focused more on leadership. We just focused on getting more diversity, to what you were just saying, Michelle, about making sure they're at the right levels, but getting more diversity into the workforce in general in all aspects. And I think we did well, but I think if we had focused on what does our leadership cohort look like, it would have provided, to what Meg was saying a while ago, you don't want to be the first one. You don't want to go first. If we had focused on some diversity in those leadership levels, I wonder if it would have provided the role modeling, and we would have seen even faster results throughout all levels of the organization. We've been able to. So again, we're doing okay, but if I could go back and do it again, I might have been a little more intentional around those leadership levels.
It's that you can be it if you see it kind of
yes,
right?
Exactly.
That you can resonate with, you can identify with. We know that makes that difference. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. Before I get into the sort of final question, when it goes to, you're doing great things. All your companies sound like are doing wonderful things. And so when it comes to attracting that next generation of talent and pulling people in and building on what you've been doing in your organizations, what are some sort of just quick tools or tips you could give to others on the call to be able to do the same, to talk about your successes without it looking performative, without it, to do it with genuine intent, but to be able to demonstrate all of the great work and the fact that you have an inclusive environment, not just diverse, because obviously there's a difference between diverse and inclusive that I know we're all very well aware of as well too. But some takeaways: is it LinkedIn? Is it going out to schools and colleges? Is it highlighting those employees in your organization and their stories? I'd just be interested in some quick ideas or of action for those on the call. Elaine, did you want to kick off?
Okay, yeah, sure. So at Orion, to promote diversity and inclusion, we do networking events. The latest one we just took part in is the Langley Chamber of Commerce put on a women's leadership lunch for Women's Day, International Women's Day. And that was the first event that Orion ladies took part in as a group, which was wonderful. And encouraging, addressing unconscious biases, encourage open dialogue about diversity and inclusion. We obviously we're a company that grew so quickly in the past 5 years. We feel like we're always running and catching up and trying to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that the company, that everyone feels heard and feels like they are part of a fantastic company. So one of the things I can say is when someone comes in for an interview, I'm always in all the interviews. So obviously, if it's a development position that we're hiring for, the managers for the development department are in the interview. One thing that I've noticed that every single one of those departments have said is that Orion is my favorite place I've ever worked at. How do you get every department to say that? It's got to be because we have made a conscious effort to make sure that everyone feels respected and heard, and we take everyone's opinion seriously. We provide skill building workshops. We allow our team to, to bring to us any courses that they want to do to upskill themselves. We create that positive work environment, which I believe is what allows people to thrive. You can only thrive if you are happy.
Thanks, Elaine. I've just got time. We've got about 1 minute left, maybe a minute and a half. Might cheat Anthony and just take a minute from you. But Meg, I'm going to ask you, and then Lindsay, I'll finish up with yourself as to if there was one takeaway that you can give, one piece of advice that you hope that resonates and stays in people's minds when they leave this conference today, and it is maybe an actionable takeaway. What would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're in a position of power or leadership, I would encourage you to try and tackle some of the systemic issues that we've talked about today and that are in place to hold folks back. And the second piece is just be aware of the readiness of the organization to move forward in DEI initiatives. What I've realized is when I push a little too hard, maybe things don't land as well, and it's time for more education, and we always start with education first. Thank you.
I love that. Lindsay.
Well, I'll just take a really practical approach, and as a communications person, I think we can, and back to the point of this panel in terms of how do we build inclusive workplaces and attract people to our companies. But if we can't tell the right stories and get those messages out there, it's all for naught in a way, even within our own organizations. So really practical thing would just be to teach people how to use LinkedIn. And it seems a very basic, but you would be very surprised. We've been doing a lot of training, teaching our people how to post, how to engage on LinkedIn. It is such a tool in our business environment for getting that brand awareness out there about your company, whether it be your inclusive work environment or otherwise. And so, it seems a little obvious, but in fact, we learned that lots of people don't know how to use it. And so it's a really practical way that you can help your tell that
I have
story.
noticed that, and I've had very, very many conversations with people. And I say, well, have you got a LinkedIn? And they tell me no. And they're just starting their careers, or maybe they're even in their career a few years and they don't do it. So it's the brand awareness piece, both from an organization, but even from an individual perspective, because we're always talking to people about building their network, and how, Victoria talked about that earlier, how important that is. And I know we don't even have time to get into the sponsorship or the piece or mentorship. We could talk for hours on some of these things, but no, I agree with you. It's absolutely so important. I'd like to thank this panel. I feel like that was 5 minutes long, and I'm not going to even wrap up, Anthony, because I know I'm 1 minute over. Thank you to Lindsay. Thank you, Meg. Thank you to Elaine for your insight and your frankness. Really appreciate it, and hoping we can do it again sometime. Thank you so much.